Welcome everybody to our first noontime talk up here in Alaska. I'm just thrilled to be able to be here and extend an invitation to all of you listening to be able to come be a part of the conversation of FixUS. It's a conversation that's happening nationally, thanks to the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, an organization that if you're not already familiar with, you will be soon. Brad Keithley, my counterpart in this effort in Alaska, who some of you may know as the Managing Director for Sustainable Budgets. Brad and I have gone back and forth on topics over the last couple of years, and Brad introduced the CRFB to me and the FixUS movement to me this spring. As a new mother, an engaged community member, I struggle to find any one political leader on either side of the aisle that really represents me. Some of you may be able to relate, but I just find myself tired of the political name calling and the unproductive rhetoric coming from both Juneau and DC. So when I found out more about FixUS, I knew I had to get involved in this effort. Over the last couple of months, I have now had the pleasure of meeting some of the team who are making this movement happen from across the United States, some of whom you'll be able to meet today. Mike Murphy, the director of the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, is here on the call with us. I'm going to go ahead and turn this on over to him so he can jump right into the introduction to FixUS and share the mission that we want to share with our Alaskan community. Mike? Mike, are you there?
Yeah.
I'm back in it.
Okay, there you go. Hey.
Sorry, everybody. This is the Zoom world when your internet goes out on you right when you're about to get introduced. That's how this works.
Welcome back, Mike.
Everybody hear me okay now? Okay, hopefully it doesn't go out again. Sorry for that little mishap. Ellen, thank you so much. And Brad for kicking off, great local chapter out in Alaska. We got a handful of people on on the webinar, but we got many people on Facebook Live that are watching us around Alaska for our first chapter meeting. And you people are what this is all about. I'm in Fairfax, Virginia right now. Although we work in DC, I haven't been able to go in the office in several months. But I'm blessed to be able to have a job where I get to do this. You guys are really stepping up and leading this locally as volunteers, and if we're going to make a difference, that's what's going to count. So I really just thank you for doing this wholeheartedly. In the time we have here, here's my role. My role here is what I want to do is introduce you to FixUS. We're going to try and do a little bit over the time. We've got about 45 minutes, I think, for this meeting today. We're going to do what I call the who, what, and why of FixUS. I'm going to give you the who and the what, but we have our fantastic speaker with us today is one of our good friends and colleagues who's helped found this effort with me, Paul Stebbins, who's going to give you the why, the inspiration of how we started this. We're going to have just a couple of housekeeping items. We're going to do Q&A on this. Please, please, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom. Starting now, whenever you want, as we're talking, you type it in and we'll get questions in. Please, please use that Q&A feature throughout. The other housekeeping item is this is live on Facebook, but we are also recording it. Just want to make sure everyone knows we were recording this so we can share it with folks that aren't able to join us live. So with that, if the technology works on my end, to give you this quick rundown of who, what is FixUS, I'm going to pull up a quick slide deck that we can run through here. And hopefully everyone can see that, and I'm just going to run through this, okay, for our first Alaska meeting here at FixUS. All right, look, here's Ellen briefly spoke to this. We're born out of the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. We're a group that's focused on the debt and budget issues, but we came to realize that our debt and budget symbolize something a much deeper problem. A system that's avoiding tough choices, can't achieve compromise, is rewarding partisanship and focusing on the short term at the expense of the long term. But it's not just the debt and the budget. We're failing to solve a range of issues as a result of this problem. this is just a handful, but there's many, many more that we're not addressing as a country. So what did we do? We realized this a couple of years ago, and we hit the road. We started a Roadshow a couple of years ago, and we've been traveling all around the country. We're now going to mark off Alaska on this map too, count this state. We've been going around the country and just talking with people about this, just talking about folks in all sorts of settings. This was not a scientific focus group. This was getting out in communities. How do people feel about the issues that we're talking about here? So we can help inform our path forward. We learned a lot from that. Lessons that informed the launch of FixUS officially earlier this year. People are exhausted, as Ellen has referred to. They are distrustful of our system and institutions. They feel homeless in the conversation that's going on right now. And they wanted to keep, though, that conversation going. Any events we were at, they really wanted to keep going. So we decided to formally launch FixUS. What is it? FixUS is a group of Americans united in concern about the state of our country, right? They think that divisions and dysfunction is in and of itself a top national priority that we need to address. And so we're doing a lot of things to seek to better understand, draw attention to that, and build support for necessary changes. What are we doing? How can you get involved? Joining FixUS, what I like to say is, when you join FixUS, a couple of things. You're part of a community, okay? A community that can sign on to our principles, our civility pledge, join our local chapter to bring attention to the problems we're talking about today. We'll talk a little bit about that civility pledge in a second. Being part of a community that wants to be part of discussions and events. We're going to be doing lots of different discussions and events, both in Alaska and around the country nationally that we've been hosting, that we hope you'll engage with us on these issues. And then there's other ways you can draw attention and bring better understanding to these issues. We're going to share lots of materials, lots of methods by which you can do that as part of this community. The civility pledge that I referenced, I'm not going to read it all here. There's a civility pledge you can find on our website. We've been promoting it on the Alaska Facebook page that we're asking people to sign. It's a simple act, but if you read this, it kind of gives you the crux of what we're about, okay? We think in this election season, it's important for people to pledge to be respectful, tone down rhetoric, engage in dialogue, okay? These are critical fundamental principles of how we're operating for FixUS, and encourage people to check that out as sort of an on-ramp to joining our effort. But we also say, in addition to being part of the community, what it means to be part of FixUS is part of the solution. Okay, we believe real change, and Paul will talk about this at length, real change not coming from Washington. Okay, we need deep and meaningful citizen engagement. What FixUS is going to be doing over the months ahead is we're going to be crowdsourcing a roadmap for what change looks like. This is not a top-down blue ribbon commission sort of effort where we're going to come and say, well, the solutions to what's dividing us are going to be. We're going to try and engage you all in that conversation, identify what the solutions should be. And we're also going to connect you with other partner organizations that are making up a broader movement that's trying to fix these issues, because we can't do this alone. This is lots of organizations, dozens and dozens, in fact, that are working to build a movement that can fix what's ailing our democracy. And you can help as state leaders. A couple basic things, right? Check out, share more information, sign that civility pledge, host a Zoom conversation in your community. And this is a bunch of ways you can see all the different ways here to sign up, follow us. I'll put this on again towards the end of the meeting here today, so you can hopefully make sure to jot that down and sign up. But that is the quick summary of the what and who of FixUS. I'm now going to transition over to Paul and let him take it. As I mentioned, Paul Stebbins, who I've gotten to know now for many years, is one of our founders of FixUS with us. And he's going to tell you both about his story of how he got to join FixUS, which I think is really illustrative to help tell the why, of really why people should care to get involved in this effort. And then we'll circle back after Paul's done and get to some Q&A. So with that, Paul,
great. Outstanding. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much. Ellen and Brad, again, I can't thank you enough for hosting this, and to everybody who's decided to participate. you have our gratitude, not just, for taking time, but as citizens. We're at a moment of great consequence in our national trajectory. And I think we could all be forgiven for sort of wondering what happened to our country and what happened to the American story that we all thought we were part of. As Ellen said, you're exhausted and fatigued by, the fighting and the vitriol. And so, my journey is not unlike a lot of citizens in this country who are frustrated. I mean, I'm an American business person. I was born in California. I lived in Utah. I actually spent a year living in Ketchikan, Alaska from 1957 to 1958. My brother was born there. So for purposes of this, I'm an honorary Alaskan, at least at one time in my life. But I spent most of my time growing up in Connecticut and in Texas. In fact, not far from where Brad did a lot of his work. But my journey took me through Georgetown University and eventually into business, where I spent my career building a global company. And along that journey, I joined something called the Business Roundtable. And while I was at the Business Roundtable, participating in policy discussions in DC, this was a group comprised of Fortune 100 companies that would visit Washington to get briefed from members of Congress, the White House, the president, many heads of the cabinet to talk about policy. But I happened to be participating in that during two things. One, the financial crisis, when we had the 08-09 disasters. I was very involved with the healthcare fight. And most importantly, relevant to this conversation, I was involved with fiscal issues or the national debt. And it was during my time at the Business Roundtable that one of my colleagues there, a guy named Dave Cody, who was the chairman of Honeywell, he was on the so-called Simpson-Bowles Commission, which was the Fiscal Responsibility Commission set up by the president to look at our long-term debt trajectory and what its threat was to the long-term viability of our sort of ship of state. And it had to do with tax policy. How do we reform the tax code that is grossly inequitable and has been sort of butchered over many years? And how do we reform entitlements so that we stabilize the spending into the future so that the most vulnerable in our society were protected and we stabilized it to be fiscally solvent into the future? In any event, what I realized is that we couldn't get anything done. The system was so broken. We were so completely torn apart by all the different impulses that were politically incentivizing disagreement. They were not incentivizing working together. And, regardless of political disposition, partisan-wise, the Business Roundtable is primarily a fairly pragmatic place. But I watched up close and spent a lot of time in the room with the people making those decisions. And I was appalled to just see how you could have all this information about how to fix something, and yet the political incentives were so powerful that we could not get it solved. So that was discouraging to me. And it was also kind of a wake-up call, because I think the business community, my own personal awakening was, we think we're leaders. We're flying in our planes, we're having these meetings, we're talking in all these sessions, and yet I don't think we're leading anything. And in fact, in some ways, we were actually part of the problem. Our, K Street operations and lobbyists were part of the pathology of perpetuating a system of incentives that made it much more easy to sort of kick the can down the road than it was to actually fundamentally solve the problem. And that really bothered me. I just could not go back to doing what I was doing, which was running around the world, traveling to offices and being busy. So I thought, well, you know what, maybe it's time to think a little bit harder about what you can do. So I actually quit. I went to my board and said, I'm done. I've been doing this since I was 25 years old, and I'm the luckiest guy ever born. I'm the American dream. I got rejected by business schools twice. So I started a business and it ended up being a successful business. But I decided to take a break. And it was during that break that I met Maya McGinnis, the founder of the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. And in service of the effort to build a national campaign to talk about the national debt, I began to be a proxy speaker around the country. And so I was going to conference rooms all over this nation, talking to small communities about the national debt and why it was a problem. And while I was doing that, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we were talking about the wrong issue. Because no matter where I went, whether it was Galena, Illinois, with people who thought, President Obama was the worst thing that ever happened in the history of politics, or San Diego, where teachers' meetings thought that he was the best thing that ever happened in politics, regardless of the political partisan group that I was in, I heard a bunch of common themes. One, the general feeling that Washington doesn't see me. You don't hear me. You don't know a damn thing about my life. You don't know anything about what I value. You're very quick to put me in a box in service of whatever political agenda you are, but you haven't asked me once what I really think. Secondly, I hear media screaming at me nonstop from the left and the right. These highly strident extremist views that are highly ideological, and they're asking me to pick a side in a fight that I don't even understand. And in my community, I have to compromise with my boss, my coworker, the colleague who's in the cubicle next to me, the person who's working on the ranch next to me, the person who's in the oil field next to me. I've got to compromise with, suppliers and customers. I've got to compromise with my wife about who takes out the garbage. I've got to compromise with my teenage kid on how they clean their room. And yet you people in Washington can't do one thing to get in a room and solve a problem. So you know what? I want to just burn this thing to the ground. And what I heard was what Ellen said. I'm exhausted that everything, this incredible diminishment of our civil discourse by people using ideology to demonize the other side in service of a cause, so that the demonization and of the enemy, the other, becomes much more valuable for political purposes than solving the problem. Now, last I checked, America was about solving problems, right? It was about getting stuff done. And everywhere in these communities that I was going, people solve problems every single day. They don't live, when you stop to help somebody change a tire, you don't ask them who they voted for. And if they tell you who they voted for, you don't hate them for the rest of your life. So what I found is that people don't hate their neighbors. They're tired of being demonized. They don't like the strident ideology. They don't like the divisiveness. They would much rather be part of their individual story, being part of a larger shared story. And that was really interesting to me. So I thought, boy, maybe there's an opportunity. Maybe there's a huge majority of people out there that actually don't believe that we should be this partisan polarized warfare. Well, what that led me to was on a journey. Mike and I spent a lot of time looking, well, maybe it's an engineering problem. I'm a business guy. Maybe we could just fix it. So it's the primary system. It's gerrymandering. It's term limits. It's money in politics. All of those things are contributor. But there was a deeper issue going on that was more cultural. And that was what led me to an author named Jonathan Haidt. And he wrote an extraordinary book, which I would recommend to anybody on this call, called The Righteous Mind. And it was the first time I actually understood the fundamental moral dynamics of tribalism. Why was it that when institutions failed us, when they ceased to be responsive to our needs as citizens, do we end up with no other recourse but to retreat to our tribal zones? And that tribalism becomes an insidious way of beginning to demonize the other, and we lose our shared and common narrative. We lose our humility. We lose our curiosity about our neighbors. We lose our sense of common sense. And all of that gets diminished when you have this failure of institutions to serve on behalf of our country. Now, of course, Lincoln was right. It's a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It's not of the Congress, by the Congress, for the Congress. It's not of the White House, by the White House, for the White House. And Hubert Humphrey was right. Hubert Humphrey, the great senator from Minnesota, once said, Washington is 26 square miles surrounded by reality. And boy, did I see that in spades. Washington was just a complete kabuki theater of its own inside baseball. And most people are out there having to pick up their kid for soccer, get the work done, working 2 jobs, grandma's in the basement, I got a healthcare problem. And you guys, are spending money all over the place. You're not fiscally responsible. There is no such thing as a budget. We're not having civil discourse about solving these problems. It's all about the enemy. So FixUS for me was a journey of, business was part of the problem. We weren't paying attention to this stuff. We had contributed to the problem. So it was about sort of taking some sense of ownership, realizing that above all, I'm a citizen too. And I realized that this isn't new in our history. If you go back to the founding of the country, when George Washington left office after 2 terms, he gave a very famous farewell address in which he warned us that 4 things would take down the United States. 4 things: hyperpartisanship, foreign intervention in our domestic affairs, fiscal irresponsibility, and the absence of civic education. Those 4 things would take a very fragile new experiment in self-government, unique in the history of organized governments in the world, and it would take it down. Because we would grow complacent, we would get trapped in partisan warfare. If it's very interesting. If any of you have read the Federalist Papers, it's worth going back. But James Madison wrote in Federalist 10, different leaders ambitiously contending to preeminence and power, divided mankind into parties, inflamed them with mutual animosity, and rendered them much more disposed to vex and oppress each other than to cooperate for the common good. That was written before the Constitution was even formed. That was written in Federalist 10. They knew this was coming. And so shame on all of us if we sort of let this happen. So my awakening was, look, this isn't new. We have great leaders. Admiral Mike Mullen, who was the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I sat on a panel with him at one time, and I asked him what would threaten the United States. He said, I'll tell you 4 things. It's K through 12 education, it's fiscal irresponsibility, energy independence, and lastly, political dysfunction. That if we don't get our act together on these things, the greatest political experiment in history is at risk. So I realized, so how do you go about solving this? Because, you know, most of us are busy. You're going to work every day. You got to do stuff. You send people to Washington in theory to fix those things, to achieve compromise, to have common sense solutions, but it doesn't happen. And so it's a little bit like the Wizard of Oz. You know, there's a guy behind the curtain who says he's got all the power, when in fact, the heart, the brain, the courage to fix these things is within each of us. It's not in Washington. It's in each of our communities around this country. And the thing is, we lack agency. We lack a sense of individual agency, or the sense that we have the power to actually solve this problem. We do. We have a tremendous amount of power, and we've got a lot of common sense, and that exhausted majority that Ellen talked about, that I have lived and felt, that many of you have felt. It is time to engage in a way and demand better, not only of our country and our political leaders, but of ourselves. Right? We're at a time where I would say nobody can sit back and watch and just say, you know what, if there was ever a time where we have to engage, we have to pay attention. There's a great poet, Mary Oliver, who wrote a famous poem called Summer's Day, in which she says, I don't know exactly what a prayer is, but I do know how to pay attention. And I think what I realized as a business guy being busy, I took America for granted. You know, the very thing that made my company possible, I was taking for granted. Because I wouldn't have a company in America if it weren't for rule of law, if it weren't for a justice system, if it weren't for infrastructure, if it weren't for a tax system, if it weren't for public education that trained the people that I was hiring. If we didn't have these things as a shared enterprise in this experiment, I wouldn't have a company. And so I thought, well, you know what? I'm so busy running around being busy that I'm not really paying attention to this deeper thing of which I have a duty of care to protect and defend, which is this national great experiment. So FixUS grows out of a great sense of urgency that it's not too late. We have the power, like they say in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy, you can click your heels. We can go home anytime we want. We don't have to ask for permission or forgiveness or anything else. We have a lot more agency and power than anybody's led us to believe. The heart, the brain, the courage are within each one of us. We don't need some Mitch McConnell or Nancy Pelosi or Donald Trump or Barack Obama to give us that heart, the brain, the courage. That's within each and every one of us, and we have the power to change. So FixUS was born out of a sense of let's take it back. We have power here. Let's exercise that, ultimately compromise is about deliberation, and certitude. Ideological certitude is the enemy of deliberation. This country and our form of government was founded on humility and doubt, not on ideological certitude. It was about compromise. It was about critical thinking. It was about scientific method. It was about the Enlightenment values. And it was about the shared common sense that we had a pretty special thing. American exceptionalism was about this amazing common purpose. And it produced the most productive economy in the world. It has risen more people out of poverty and created hope. And it's been a beacon of light to the world. So China didn't do this to us. Russia didn't do it to us. Nobody did this to us. We did it to us. And so we have the power to change it. I mean, Boris Pasternak, many of you may remember a great movie, Dr. Zhivago, but the author of the book, Dr. Zhivago, was a guy named Boris Pasternak. And there's a great line in his book where he says, our sin is our toleration. And to sit back and watch the greatest political experiment in history sort of go down the tubes because we weren't paying attention, I just can't do it. So that led me to FixUS. And when I met Maya and Mike, here was a team that were deeply involved in policy. They were working on some of the hardest issues in the country. The national debt and the fiscal budget reflect our core values. What are we investing in for the future of this great experiment? And it was just getting ripped apart by political stuff. So, we have an opportunity here, I think, to change that trajectory. There's a great group in New York called More in Common. They did a lot of research on this called the Hidden Tribes Report. And they basically said the idea that we are just being reduced to liberals or conservatives or Republicans or Democrats or right or left, it doesn't mean anything. Most of us resent being labeled by any of that stuff. And the Pew statistics, the Pew research will tell you that while there are many people registered for a party, a great overwhelming majority of Americans now self-identify as unaffiliated. The partisan system is broken. And the More in Common guys guys did a report called Hidden Tribes, and they didn't care whether you were anywhere from the progressive activist on the left, which is about 8% of the population, to the committed conservatives on the right, who were 6%. Those were the true believers. They're the ideologues that are shouting everybody down. That's the cancel culture from the right and the left that won't tolerate diversity of thought. But everybody else in the middle, whether you're a traditional liberal, a passive liberal, a disengaged, a traditional conservative, those are the people who are saying, why can't we solve our problems? Why can't we reach across the aisle? Why can't I see my neighbor and work in common spirit to solve our problems? So that's what brought me to this journey. I feel like I'm the luckiest guy ever born in the world, to be born in this country and have had the opportunities I had. But I'll tell you what, we're gonna ruin it. It's gonna fall apart if we don't engage. And I would just say it's about individual agency. We have more power than people believe, and it's time to engage. So I'm grateful that you're here. I would love to see FixUS Alaska be part of this movement. We're building it out state by state. We've got thinkers and academics and research people, but it's all about the ground game. It's all about citizens in their communities saying, I've had it, I've had enough. I want to take back my country. So with that, Mike, I'll turn it back to you for Q&A and whatever.
Well, we're going to start Q&A now. I've got a few questions sent in, and then for folks, again, for folks that are on the webinar part of this on Zoom, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom. I'll get to that in a second, but I'll just say real quick, it wouldn't surprise people to know that it's far from the first time I've heard Paul talk on that, but every time, gets you fired up while we're trying to do this. This is, again, that's point of bringing the why here. And I think a lot of people agree with the sentiments of this. So for those of you watching, folks that want to get involved, please do sign up, fixusnow.org. Couple of questions being sent in. And we'll try to get to as many as we can in the 15 minutes. Paul, during the roadshow, did you find Republicans defining the problem differently than Democrats? Does one set of solutions seem to work better for one party and another set for the other?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm really glad you asked that, because people want to know what's the framing of these discussions. What I found universally, and I'll tell you, there are no exceptions, where there are people in a room from various backgrounds who come from different partisan sort of ecosystems or dispositions. But what I heard overwhelmingly was a great deal of dissatisfaction with the partisan dialogue, because it was all about my way and not listening. And even people who were registered partisans were very unhappy with the system. Now, it is true that I would encounter from time to time what I would call the true believers. There were people for whom there was only one orthodoxy. It was a prism through which they filtered it, and it was all those damn liberals' faults, and the country wouldn't be going to hell if it weren't for them. Or it was the left saying, if it weren't for those crazy right-wing conspiracy nuts, Tea Party, whatever, they're the ones, it's all their fault. And the issue is, neither one of those is true. Neither one of those is true, because look, Alfred North Whitehead used to say, seek simplicity but distrust it. And I'm a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant from Connecticut, but I went to a Jesuit school. And one thing the Jesuits will teach you a lot about is there's no cheap clarity. If you think this stuff is simple, faith is about humility and doubt. It is not about certainty. And so problems are complex and they require nuance. And anybody who thinks they're absolutely certain that this is the orthodox answer and this is the partisan frame through and this is the only way to think about it, I'm telling you, if it fits on a bumper sticker, it's probably not true. And most of you know that in the reality of your day-to-day lives. What this is about is we're seeking truth. We're trying to restore trust in our common community, and we want to be in service of a larger idea. That's what I heard over and over and over. And yeah, there are partisans out there, but it's a broken system. It no longer adequately reflects. And I'll tell you, I'll give you a very specific of the Committee for Responsible Budget once did an online test where they took 100 items that had to do with fixing Social Security, just as an example, a very big part of the entitlement issue. And they took a broad cross-section of people from Democrat, left, right, middle, and put them in and said, interact with this and you solve Social Security. Here are the tools, you pick and choose. Let's do what we can to fix it and make it solvent. Well, there was 92% convergence of agreement across a broad political spectrum. But here's the second part. When they take that same group of people and you put a D or an R in front of those line items, the convergence drops to 30%. The minute it has a partisan identity, instantly it must be those other guys who have done something wrong. So if we could just get the partisan labeling out of this and get back to solving problems, which most of us spend our lives doing every day, we would go a lot further. And that's what I heard in communities was, don't label me. You don't know anything about me. And the Republican Party that I grew up with in Connecticut doesn't even exist anymore. So what are nobody even knows what they mean. What they're really saying is, don't insult me. Don't treat me like a child. Treat me like an adult. I can solve problems. I can handle the truth. Quit trying to put me in service of some partisan nonsense that's in your own self-interest. That's what I heard.
Next question, someone typed in, and I'll take this one. Just someone wrote in, who are the funders of FixUS?
So we're funded, we're housed underneath the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. So that is, I think, Mike, what is it? Something like
Yeah, that's what I can answer this one,
yeah,
Paul. I mean, so basically, it's a project of the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, which is a non-partisan 501c3 charitable organization. And so FixUS as a project has been funded both directly in support of the project by some individual donors that are supportive of the effort, including small donors that are supportive of this effort, as well as out of funding that we receive from the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, which is funded by a diverse array of grant-making foundations and individuals that are supportive of our mission. So it's a variety of sources. Next question. Okay, that's a good one. Next question. How do we achieve change in a pandemic environment, i.e. being quarantined at home?
Well, that's a very insightful question. So we are all living in an extraordinary moment in our history. I mean, this pandemic is unprecedented. And for some, it means, economic panic. For some, it means loss of life. For some, it means loneliness, despair, isolation. It means being cut off from all of our conventional patterns. It also has other things where I would say that if I think about the civic work I'm doing, my ability to engage with other like-minded people has probably gone up 3 times what it was when I was traveling around on airplanes and trying to attend conferences or fly to places to meet people. The ability to do all this on Zoom and to have conversations, and the fact that people are more located in one place as opposed to constantly bouncing around. I would say one of the strange unintended consequences or silver linings of the pandemic has been it's allowed more conversation and more quality and density of conversation, both one-on-one and in group sessions, than I was able to achieve when I was busy running around going to, I had to make sure I caught this conference because that speaker was going to be there, or the guy who's running that foundation or the woman who's running this foundation, I'm trying to meet them, and the only way I can do is if I catch them in between their hectic schedule. That stuff has changed. So I would say it's actually created a very strange unintended consequence of more focus and more quality of focus has been brought on reform efforts because of the imposed quarantine under the pandemic than we were able to achieve, I would say before that. Now, I certainly don't want it to stay that way. None of us do. We all want a vaccine. We'd all like to be able to get back to our lives. It's just crazy. And anybody who's got kids at home and is homeschooling and trying to figure out what's going to happen in the fall, I mean, this is just, the disruption is just phenomenal, to say nothing of, sickness, disease, loss of life, and the millions of people who are being just devastated economically. So we have a duty of care to address that huge issue. But I would say, there's an old Samuel Johnson used to say, execution as a way of focusing one's thoughts. And I'll tell you, I'm a martial arts guy, and they used to say that character is not revealed in victory, it's revealed in defeat. And by that, I mean, it's only when there's real stress that we understand where our character is as people, as individuals. And I would say for all of the pain and difficulty that we've gone through with the pandemic, the economic crisis, the murder of Floyd, and the protests that we're seeing in the street, I've also seen extraordinary acts of grace, courage, community, compassion. It's brought out in some instances the best of people. Now, the media makes its revenue model on reporting the worst. But I'll tell you, there's some extraordinary things going on in this country that really prove the character of this great nation. And so it's a mixture of these things. And I would say we have to look at all these crises as an opportunity, not just a crisis. So in my view, I'm trying to look at it as an opportunity to create a lot of groundwork that needs to be laid to build a national organization out of this.
Before I get to the next question, just, relate to the pandemic. I was actually having a pretty good day there, Paul, until you reminded me of the dealing with schools reopening, which is pretty much.
You got to do math in
these
about
days.
half an hour, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Okay, next question, Paul. We get this one a lot, and I can also answer this one a little bit too if you want. But what are the top priorities advocated by FixUS? In other words, what is the Alaska chapter to do to promote this value set?
Go ahead, Mike. No, Mike, go ahead.
Here's the thing, the way you say, you get this question a lot, obviously, when you have a conversation like this. Well, okay, what do you want? Like, what are you going to do? Here's the thing that's a little bit unique about FixUS that people might find surprising. We actually decided to launch FixUS without having an answer to that question, right? Because we think this problem is so big, so deep, so wide, that for us to think we're going to come in and say, oh, we want to advocate for this, we didn't think that was right. We actually figured we knew there was a problem, and people agree with the problems. We can unite people around that problem, build a community that wants to do that. But we had the humility of knowing we didn't have the answers. So therefore, as I said in this sort of brief description of what FixUS is, we are going to be, over the course of the months ahead, working with supporters who want to take part in what we refer to as crowdsourcing what these solutions should be. We think it should come from the bottom up. Now, saying that, it could be illustrative of the types of things that are being discussed, right? Paul mentioned some of these. People are talking about that we need reforms to our election system. There's a lot of different ways one can reform our election system, and we'll be talking about those ideas. There's certainly ways we need to deal with things like redistricting reform, things like that. Money in politics, okay? Whether or not we should be encouraging more national service in this country, or whether we need more civic education. There's a lot of ideas that have been talked about, and are the types of things that I envision FixUS will be having a position advocating for. But the point here is we want people to join us on this mission, sign on to our pledge, agree with our principles, because people agree on this problem, and then take part with us on identifying what some of those top priorities are going to be. They'll feed into something we will push after this election in 2021. So hopefully that answers it. Paul, please feel free to go.
Yeah, I might add a little bit of that, because look, I'm sure there are a lot of people in this call who are sick to death of being told what some answer is. Some commission told you what it's supposed to be. Well, you probably know a hell of a lot more about what's good for your community than we do, right? And so one of the great things that's come out of the pandemic, interesting enough, is a revisitation of federalism. Most people have a lot of faith in their local community and even local community leadership. They just have no confidence in Washington, because as it goes through the strange, prism and filter of the partisan orthodoxy of the $5 or $6 billion that's going to get spent in this election campaign, it sort of gets jumbled and lost, and you end up having to pick sides. When did the United States become sides? I thought we were one country in service of one idea. So why don't we begin to start focusing on what we can do as a community? We don't have to wait for Nancy Pelosi or Mitch McConnell to tell us how to fix the problems in our community. Yes, there are some large issues the country has to confront, but believe it or not, it's amazing how much consensus we've seen this. I mean, there's not to digress too much, but to the actual specifics of what do you do? We took a group, Larry Diamond out of Stanford and Jim Fishkin took a group, and they set it up in Dallas where they took everybody from hardcore sort of MAGA hat, make America great, Trump forever, all the way to the left, the progressive activists, woke people, and put them in a room. And it was like an interesting science experience, because these people basically go in with a very high bias of thinking that the other side is the enemy. And I'll tell you, after a week of deep dive on any number of issues, whether it was fiscal issues, on immigration issues, on infrastructure, on education, on policing, all that stuff, there was a 68 convergence of agreement on issues. Once you get it out of the polarized doctrinaire orthodoxy of you have to stay on the reservation or you get blistered, left to their own devices, citizens in a room will naturally migrate to solving the problem. And interestingly enough, when you're in the coffee break and you hang out and Sally meets Fred, the MAGA guy, and Sally's the progressive activist, and they get together and they find out they both have a kid with autism, they've both got a grandmotherhood, some sort of disease, you would be amazed how much the humanity takes over, and this political identity, this objective, distant idea. It's like the old thing about the people who hate immigrants the most are the towns who have none. So it becomes an objectified issue in service of an ideology and an orthodoxy and never gets around to solving problems. Most of us on this call, left to our own devices, would get in a room and we would pragmatically go about the business of solving the problem. And I think that the experiment that Larry Diamond and Jim Fiskin came up with has been repeated over and over and over again, and was very evident in the research by Hidden Tribes. People want to solve the problem. So what do we do? The first thing you do is you agree, we're not going to put up with this cheap clarity anymore. Quit treating me like a child and thinking that I'm in service of some ideological certitude. I want to solve problems, and I want representatives on my behalf in my community, in my town government, in my state government, and in my federal government to be responsive to the idea that enough, quit lecturing me about all your ideological stuff. Please go solve the problem. That's what I want to get done. We've had the least productive Congress in decades. You can't get anything done. So I would say what to do. It's not about the bumper sticker. It's not about you got to have this position on 3 issues. You'll figure out what you want to do. You guys, you'll know what's right on immigration and infrastructure for Alaska. I don't need to tell you that. I live in New York and Miami, Florida. What the hell would I know about that? So I would say that it's not about telling you what to think. It's about let's begin to listen again, have some compassion, a sense of humor, and begin to solve problems.
So one rule for FixUS meetings I try to hold to is we try to end on time. So we're kind of running out of time. I'll give one more answer to that question, more specifically, and then I think I'm going to hand it over to Ellen and maybe say a little wrap-up words here, and then I'll close us out. But one more specific answer to that question about what you can do, okay? What priorities. It seems like a simple thing, but it's important. Is go sign that civility pledge, but more importantly, go get some other people to sign it too, okay? Basically, part of the issue is the first step is acknowledging we have a problem and putting on a badge that says we're part of a movement that doesn't want to be that way, okay? What Ellen and Brad are leading on the Alaska side is one of their ideas is to do that civility pledge, but then they want to get elected officials and others to sign that pledge too. And so please encourage you to work with them, go get others to sign that pledge too, because that's a first step here in addition to everything that Paul just said as well. So with that, Ellen, I'll let you kind of wrap us up here before I say a few concluding remarks from Paul.
Wonderful. Thank you, gentlemen. I'm just so grateful, Mike and Paul, for you guys taking the time today, and Brad and Rachel, who I'm guessing is hiding behind the scenes, who have truly been instrumental in putting all of this together and continuing the discussion. And thank you to everyone who took the time today to tune in and be involved and take that first step or second or third or fourth step in being engaged with this discussion. And like Mike said, I totally encourage you to reach out to your representative, remind them about that civility pledge, ask them to sign it. And as far as something that you can do today, that would be it. So I really encourage that. If you've joined our discussion on Facebook, you might have saw that the ranked choice voting is one of the approaches that some people have urged to close the partisan divide. And because Alaska is facing that issue on the ballot this November, among other things, in future sessions, we intend to explore that issue in future noontime talks and bring in speakers from both sides to discuss that and talk that through. So in the meantime, to stay up to date with us in the conversation nationally at #FixUS on Twitter, and locally at FixUS Alaska on both Facebook and LinkedIn. And you can stay in tune and share your thoughts. And if there's anything that you want to add to the discussion, I encourage you to do so. And we'll be here plugging away. So thanks again. Mike, anything you want to add?
I'll let Paul, if you'd like, Paul, say a quick concluding remark, and then I'll wrap this up here.
Yeah, thank you. Just look, as a citizen, as a fellow citizen, as an American, thank you for taking the time. I mean, it matters. Just showing up matters. And I don't think there's ever been a time in our history where just paying a little bit more attention to this very extraordinary thing that we all share, now is the time. It's a moment of urgency. We cannot be complacent. The Knight Foundation has measured that there are 100 million people that have just disengaged from the political process, and for damn good reason. It doesn't work. It's broken. It's not responsive. It doesn't listen. The candidates are terrible. The parties are awful. So there's good reason why people are disengaged, but the only way we're going to solve it is if we re-engage. Not because I got all the answers. Forget that. It's just about beginning to pay attention and take a little more control, and don't wait for permission or forgiveness from our current leaders. Let's just demand better. And we have much more power and agency than we have been led to believe. So thank you is really all I got to say. Just the fact that you're here is a huge first step. So thanks, Ellen, Brad, and everybody on this call.
And I will just wrap up very quickly because there's not much more to add to what Paul said. Immensely grateful to Ellen and Brad for leading Alaska, always to Paul for his leadership with us, and to everyone for tuning in. There will be more to come. I encourage people to follow what Ellen and Brad are doing, engage, and sign up. FixUsNow.org, sign our civility pledge, sign up locally, but we will be in touch with you for those that are interested. And last but not least, everyone, please stay safe and healthy, family and friends during these tough times. So with that, I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Great.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you very much.